One of the first things you need to decide when you start planning a Mount Rainier trip is deciding when to go. Is summer the best time to visit Mount Rainier? The only time? We're going to find out. Now, you may have a set time that you can travel. For example, if your kids are in school, then your options are limited and summer is the only choice that you have. In that case, it's helpful to know what the park will be like when you visit. But if you have more flexibility, then seeing what the park is like at different times of the year can help you decide when to go. Hi, I'm James Ian, and I've written numerous guides and published several itineraries for Mount Rainier National Park. Those two situations are what today's episode is for. We'll look at what to expect throughout the year in the park so that you can decide when is the best time for your trip. And I'm going to share my top recommendations based on several common scenarios at the end, so be sure to stay for that. If you're watching this on YouTube, like and subscribe right now. If you're watching or listening somewhere else, then follow my podcast to get the episodes as they come out. Mount Rainier National Park is famous for the mountain views, of course, but also for the incredible meadows of wildflowers in the summer. It's also one of the snowiest places in the United States, and the mountain creates its own weather system, and this can change suddenly throughout the day. So you can have a very different experience depending on when you go and what the weather is like when you're there. So let's take a look at exactly what to expect so that you can decide the best time for your trip to Mount Rainier National Park.
Welcome to National Parks Collecting with James Ian, the National Park expert. He is here to help you have the best national parks trips ever. Get tips, discover hidden gems, and learn all you need to know. This is your path to collecting national parks experiences, memories, and maybe even a stamp or two.
In general, unless you're specifically looking for a winter experience, the brief summer months are the best time to go, but the fall is also really beautiful. It rains quite a bit in the spring and it snows a lot in the winter, which lingers, so it's very different throughout the year. Let's start with what Mount Rainier is like in the spring. Spring in the park is roughly April through June. This is when the park starts to open up again after the winter. Snow starts to melt at the lower altitudes and baby animals are born. The park's waterfalls are particularly impressive at this time of year because of the snow melt, and the early wildflowers are starting to emerge late spring. The busy summer season hasn't started yet, so there are a lot fewer people during this season so that you can enjoy a little bit more of a leisurely time in the park. However, on the downside, snow is still deep at the higher elevations, so only the lower elevation trails are typically accessible for hiking in the spring. This means that many of the popular trails are actually not open, and the ones that are can be very muddy. Most accommodations are also not open yet in the early spring, although they do start to open up late spring. And it can be very unpredictable. That can impact campgrounds and other services. So April is technically spring, but it is still more like winter in most of the park. In May, you'll still see tons of snow in the park, even in the Paradise area. Many of the park roads are closed, though the Stephen Canyon's entrance to Mount Rainier typically opens sometime in May. More park facilities also open up in May, including the Memorial Center at Paradise, along with the information centers, the Longmire Wilderness Information Center, the White River Wilderness Information Center, and the Paradise Wilderness Information Center all open up in May. For your accommodation, if you visit in May, the Paradise Inn typically opens late May, so it's not open for most of the month, but just a little bit at the end. For camping, the Cougar Rock and Ohanapekosh grounds and picnic areas are also open typically late in May. And then in June, things are starting to warm up, and it's still spring, but it's starting to feel a little bit more like summer. Still cool. The higher elevations are still covered in snow. Even in the Paradise area, which is open, many of the trails are typically still covered in snow. You can hike, but the very famous Skyline Trail, which is amazing, you'll still need to wear micro spikes or other kind of traction devices in June even. The popular Sunrise area does not usually open until late June or sometimes even early July. So your options in where in the park that you can visit are still a little bit limited even in June. The temperatures in June are usually raising from mid 40s to mid 60s, so cool, not unpleasant though. So spring is not my favorite season to visit just because I think the best trails are still covered in snow. I really like the Sunrise area. I love the Skyline Trail. And the wildflowers, which are really part of the experience, are not at their peak by a long shot in June. But let's move on to summer, and this is peak time in the park. It's short though, it's only July and August. This is when the park becomes its busiest, especially on weekends when tons of people come from Seattle and the surrounding areas. The 4th of July holiday is kind of crazy. Summer weekends, you'll need to get to some of the popular spots like Paradise and Sunrise before 7 a.m. to get a parking spot. So it gets really, really busy. However, there's a reason this is a great time to go if you can navigate around the crowds, because this is when the wildflowers are in their peak bloom. So incredibly beautiful. Also, everything is usually open by early July. The Sunrise Day Lodge and the Sunrise Visitors Center. The trails, some of them are still a little bit covered in the snow in July, but mostly starting to clear. If you want to avoid the crowds, I do recommend trying to visit weekdays if you can and getting there very early. You can also head to some of the more remote spots like the northwest corner, the Carbon River, the Lake Mowich areas are much less visited, but it's still incredibly beautiful. So do expect a little bit of snow. I still recommend taking microspikes just in case, but the wildflowers are really spectacular and the warm weather is just perfect. You can expect clearer skies during this time too, which gives you better chances of actually seeing the mountain, which you want to do if you can, obviously. But always check the weather at the location that you're headed to and adjust if necessary. If you've got a little bit more flexibility built into your itinerary. I do recommend trying to be on the trails where the views of Mount Rainier are a highlight on a clear day so that you can appreciate them at their full kind of splendor. Days are usually up into the 70s and lows can be around mid 50s in July. If I had to pick one month to go, it would probably be August. This is the best time to see the wildflowers. The first weeks of August also has the best weather with less rain than other months, so you do have the best chance of seeing the mountains. Not a guarantee, of course. But you do need to be prepared for the crowds. Most of the park is snow-free in August, so that's kind of good. You can leave your micro spikes at home, and the wildlife is a little bit more active. You can often see elk, black bears, mountain goats in some of the areas. But the other critters that are around are the bugs and the mosquitoes, so take bug spray in summer. So we are halfway through already. Before we look at the rest of the year in Mount Rainier National Park, if you're watching this on my @National Parks Collecting YouTube channel and you haven't already, please like and subscribe below. It really does help. Now, let's move on to the next season. What's Mount Rainier like in the fall? The fall is also short. It's just September and October. And September is another of my favorite months to visit Mount Rainier National Park. In fact, in some ways, it's even better than August. Two good reasons for this are, one, there's a lot fewer people in the park right after Labor Day weekend, and the weather's still really good at this time of the year. I've been the week after Labor Day, and it was easy to get a parking spot. The trails weren't super crowded. The weather was perfect. Like, really just a wonderful time to be there. The main areas were snow-free, and while it wasn't peak wildflower season that had passed, there were still some late season wildflowers in some of the meadows, so you still got a sense of the wildflowers. Later in the month, towards the end of September, beginning of October, you start to see more autumnal colors, the oranges and reds from the blueberry bushes, the huckleberries, they all start changing color. So that's also a really nice time to be there. A little contrast to the wildflowers, but equally beautiful. You can also, of course, enjoy berry picking there. In addition to the blackberries and huckleberries, there's thimbleberries and salmonberries that you can go and pick there. So it's a kind of a fun time to be there for that as well. Black bears and deer are also very active in the fall. The bears are all filling up for the winter, so it's a good chance to see them. Always take bear spray, of course. The weather in the fall, it's starting to get a little bit cooler, but still very pleasant. The highs are typically in the high 60s, lows mid 50s. Things do start to close down for the season in September, so you need to be mindful of that. Early in September is better. If you want everything to be open, of course, then you're not going to get the full color. But if you're okay being flexible, then later in the month is still very spectacular. Visitor centers and the facilities are open in early September, but when the snow starts to fall in late September, typically some facilities do start closing. Visitor centres in Sunrise and Ohanapekosh also close in mid-September. Paradise Inn also ends its open season, while the Sunrise Day Lodge and the Paradise Wilderness Information Centre close earlier during the month as well. So things are really starting to shut down. The best time to see the fall foliage is right at the end of September, the first weeks of October. It's getting colder in October. Now the average lows are down into the low 30s and the highs are in the high 40s. By late October, as we get deeper into the month, there's a good chance of snow. So make sure that you're prepared for cold weather. Winter is arriving and it gets early and the winter season is long. If you're visiting at that time, the Longmire Wilderness Information Centre, the White River Information Centre also close mid-October. So then we get into winter, and winter is long. It is November through March, and it is really cold and really snowy. In fact, Mount Rainier National Park is known to be one of the snowiest places in the country. Paradise area gets an annual average snowfall of around 640 inches, which measures more than 50 feet. That's a lot of snow. This makes it perfect for winter activities. So the park just kind of completely switches. It's incredibly beautiful, but there's just a lot of snow. There's also a lot fewer people. Most of the roads are closed in the park in winter, so make sure that you check for accessible roads. The Southwest Nisqually entrance and the Carbon River entrance are the only entrances open to the park in the winter. The roads from the Nisqually entrance to Longmire are typically accessible all year round, although they close when the weather's very extreme. And then the roads between Longmire and Paradise open typically only on the weekends, and they close every night, so they're only open during the day. The Carbon River Road is only accessible to foot traffic and bicycles. Vehicles are only allowed at the park entrance, not actually beyond the entrance. If you visit Mount Rainier in the winter, the park does require that all vehicles carry tire chains for safety precautions, obviously, while visiting the park. So you need to plan your travel pretty well, always get lots of information on the road status, the weather forecasts, be well equipped, keep yourself updated, and be prepared. I really don't recommend going in November. It's kind of one of the worst months, I think, to go. You won't enjoy too much until around mid-December, when the snow is thick enough for the winter activities. By the middle of December, then you really get that spectacular winter scenery that the park is just blanketed in snow and there's winter stuff to do. If you're planning an overnight stay, the National Park Inn, which is next to the Longmire Museum, is open even during the winter. So that's a really good option if you want to stay inside the park. You'll also find plenty of sledding areas in the Paradise and snowmobile sites along West Side Road and the loop roads on the Cougar Rock campground. So from mid-December to February, I think, is the best time for a winter visit. March is the wettest month and there's almost a 50% chance of rain or snow. Generally, I would skip November and March, typically enjoy the park in winter from December through February. Okay, so we have looked at Mount Rainier National Park throughout the year, but we aren't done yet. I'm going to end with my top recommendations for when to go based on common requirements. But before we do, you'll see by now that there's really a lot that goes into planning a trip to Mount Rainier, no matter when you go. Obviously, what planning you need to do varies depending on what time of the year you go. Most people visit typically from very late spring through the fall, unless you're specifically planning a winter trip. If you're visiting in the late fall to spring, then your options are much more limited, which brings its own planning challenges, obviously. But in some ways, it's easier because you can only do what's accessible and open. But if you visit during the most popular summer months, There's a lot, actually, to see and do, but it can be really hard to plan for them all. The weather can be fickle. Mount Rainier is often hidden behind clouds, and you want to see it if you can. Allowing some flexibility will definitely help maximize your choices. Aside from that, with a big mountain in the middle of it, planning a trip can be tricky. The main season is short, it can be crowded, and if you go at other times, then you need to factor in various closures. The sections of the park are separate from each other because there's a mountain in the middle, and they do require some driving to get to, so it can be hard to know the right time to be in each place for the best views, for the best light, for the best chances of not sharing the experience with a million other people. In fact, the number one thing that people ask me about is how to put everything together into an actual itinerary. They worry that they'll miss out on something. They worry that they'll be somewhere at the wrong time. Some are traveling with their whole family or friends and stressing about how to keep everybody happy. It can be overwhelming, but you don't have to do it alone. To help with exactly this, I've created several detailed deluxe itineraries for 1 day, 2 day, and 3 day visits to Mount Rainier National Park that do all the heavy lifting for you. These itineraries are based around a summer or early fall visit. They start with a park overview, and then for each day, there's a detailed breakdown of exactly what to do with precise timings. I've also included different options for different activity levels. And then there are hiking descriptions and maps. They also include driving descriptions and maps. There's tips, timings, warnings of things to watch out for, pay attention to, etc. By using one of my itineraries, you'll save time on planning and ensure that you don't miss out on any of the park's highlights. They give you all the information that you need in one spot so that you don't need to worry about missing out on a highlight of the park or stress about how to put everything together that you want to do into a schedule that makes the most sense. With these itineraries in hand, you'll just have more time to focus on the breathtaking views and less on the logistics of your visit. Just follow a link in the show notes below. Now, as promised, let's look at some snapshots. First up, what's the best time to visit Mount Rainier for wildflowers? Some flowers are blooming in late June, and some late season flowers bloom in September, but the wildflowers are at their peak from mid-July until the first weeks of August. So if this is what you really want to see, that's the best time to go. When is the best weather in Mount Rainier National Park? July and August have the most pleasant weather. They tend to be the driest and the warmest. When is the best time to avoid the crowds in Mount Rainier National Park? Definitely not July and August. If you want to visit Mount Rainier without the crowds, but you still want to go when things are open, then I recommend going in early September. I love it there in September. There are still people there for sure, so you do need to factor that into your decisions about when to go to each area and when to be there and for how long. But it's a lot less crazy, especially on the weekdays. Try to avoid weekends even then if you can. This is when a lot of people come from Seattle and the surrounding areas for a weekend trip to the park. Of course, there are a lot fewer people in the winter too, but that's just a very different experience then. Also great though. When is the best time to travel to Mount Rainier National Park on a budget? December and January are generally the least expensive times to go to Mount Rainier. The shoulder seasons can be cheaper than the peak summer seasons too. Just remember that in spring, a lot of the trails are still covered in snow. When is the best time to have a winter adventure in Mount Rainier National Park? December through February are great times for a winter adventure. When is the worst time to visit Mount Rainier National Park? November and March are my least favorite months. November, the winter season, really hasn't fully kicked in yet, and March can be very wet. When is the best time overall to visit Mount Rainier National Park? I think it is the summer. Summer and very early fall. Even though these are the busiest months, July through early September are the best times to go there because this is when everything is open, the wildflowers are at their peak, the weather's beautiful, they tend to be drier, more chance of seeing the mountains. So you will have to deal with the crowds, but everything else, this really makes these the best months to go. If you want help planning your trip, check the links in the description box below. There's a bunch of planning and booking resources that you can use to plan and book your trip. And keep watching my videos to get even more help so that you can have the best national parks vacation ever. And if you want to get notified about the next episode, subscribe and click below.